a man tried to run away, and the people that were carrying out the execution essentially moved their weapons to fire at the man running away, while the boy was basically dragged out to be executed. And by the time the guns traversed back, a whole group of people were behind him. So as they opened fire, people fell forward and on top of the boy. And then later that day, guards came back to sort of finish people off. And interestingly, the man next to the boy was also still alive. He was badly wounded and moaning. And the guard came over, shot him in the back of the head, and parts of his body went onto the boy, and the guard actually just didn't like the look of it, so walked away. Later, the boy managed to climb out from under these bodies, found one other person who had survived, and then basically the two of them escaped. Now, he gave evidence before the Yugoslav war crimes trial. Very, very moving evidence. And at the end of his evidence, the presiding judge asked him, "Is there anything that you'd like to say?" Now, bearing in mind that every single male member of this boy's family had been murdered, he was the only surviving male person in the family. And he said this, and I don't think anybody who was involved in this trial has ever forgotten it. He said, "Well, first of all, Your Honours, I'd like to tell you that from everything I saw on that day, there was a system at work. It was well organised. We were moved between location A, location B. The execution sites were all set up as far as I recall." Now, that was actually very good evidence for us in terms of, well, okay, there's a system going on. But then he said lastly, but actually, what I'd also like to say is, however much this has all affected me and my family, I actually want to publicly express that I want to forgive these people. And I want to forgive these people because if I don't forgive these people for what they did to my family, we can actually never have any kind of future together in this country. Now, this is a kid at the time. I mean, he was 21, 22 years old, and he'd been involved in these absolutely appalling events, buried under dead bodies. And he was actually talking about forgiveness. He was actually talking about forgiving the people that had done this to his family. And I think that actually profoundly touched all of us who were involved in the trial. And I remember one American judge, Judge Patricia Ward, basically saying, loud enough so that you could actually hear it. And she was talking to her fellow judges, and she basically said, that kid deserves a break. I mean, he said in a way that, he really does deserve an opportunity. And actually later, after President Clinton of the United States had finished his presidential term, he went to Bosnia. And through various links, I was asked to provide a witness from the case to meet with him. And so this kid actually met President Clinton in the Holiday Inn. Clinton had planned to spend 20 minutes with him, and he ended up spending nearly 2 hours with this boy. So, out of all of this tragedy, this kid, I keep in touch with him from time to time. A small signal of hope out of some fairly terrible events. Now, Mladic will have to, General Ratko Mladic, recently arrested, will have to confront all of this evidence. This is only part of the case against him. As I've said, the evidence, in my view, is fairly strong. Of course, he will plead, I suspect, not guilty. He hasn't yet pleaded. He has to make a plea, I think, on July the 4th, because he refused to plead guilty or not guilty at the very first hearing. So the judges will he'll either enter a plea, or if he doesn't enter a plea, the judges will enter a plea of not guilty on his behalf. When these events took place in 1995, and certainly during the trial that I was dealing with, we never believed that Mladic would ever be arrested. So, it's an extraordinary event that this has actually taken place, and certainly, I think, indicative of what some of the sort of advertising literature said, that ultimately it's becoming a fact now that all of these people are caught up with in the end. Anyway, I think I've said enough. Thank you very much indeed for your attention. Happy to Questions? Everybody wants to go home. There's a question over there. Oh, okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and my name is Mladic from the Party of Internationalization. As everyone has known that now, the crime tribunal is starting the case 002. So now, Madam President of the Legacy Office and the ECC also mentioned about the legacy of justice. Yeah. So my question is that what is the judicial legacy that the international tribunal for the Yugoslavia? So what is the legacy of the former international tribunal for Yugoslavia for the ECCC? Yeah.
I mean, it's actually a very good question that you're asking, because I actually think that this court, for all of the challenges that it's faced here in Cambodia, is exercising a much more powerful legacy than the Yugoslav Tribunal was capable of. And there are actually fundamental reasons for that. The Yugoslav Tribunal was not established in the country where the crimes took place. And it took many, many years for all of the peoples of the former Yugoslavia to come to a view about the court. Many people mistrusted the court. The Bosnian Serbs in particular, the individuals unfortunately were members of that community. I mean, not all Serbs committed crimes. Many of them were against crimes, but a significant proportion of the Bosnian Serb community did commit crimes. They mistrusted the court a great deal, because it was far away. It was based in The Hague in the Netherlands. It wasn't based in the country itself. And I think actually probably the lessons that could have been learned from the Yugoslav Tribunal for here, we've actually already learned. I said in a press conference today, I've done many of these hearings that we've had this week at the court, where we're dealing with procedural matters which need to be settled before the trial begins. And actually this one that we've just done here is the most well-ordered that I've ever been involved in. I mean, and that's a great credit to Cambodia itself, you know, that we were able to do that here when so many people said that this trial would never happen. I can tell you of many times at the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal where I found myself involved in a circus, basically, where things didn't go well, where, you know, control was lost in the courtroom of events, and yet here things went very positively. So I actually think many of the lessons that we could have learned from the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal are lessons actually that are already learned and in practice here actually now. The only thing I would say is, and you know, it's being done, we have, you know, the legacy officer is here. We started very late with legacy at the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal. I mean, I think, you know, one of the lessons learned is start early with legacy. And I guess, you know, this court has a few more years to run yet. You know, we need to start doing things now. It was left very late with the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal, probably, you know, 9-10 years into its existence before people really started doing serious work. So, as I say, I mean, I think, you know, we should be very positive about the court here. We're doing many things right, and actually I think there will be many lessons that other courts can learn from this court.
My name is Jacob. Over time we've had a long list of genocides, massacres all over the world. There's a website called Genocide Watch. We all grew up with the Holocaust. We've had Bosnia-Herzegovina, all on down, and I'm pretty sure many more will follow. My question is, how can you do this work, your line of work, without becoming very cynical about human nature?
Actually, yeah. I mean, I think because in all of these cases, you always meet extraordinary people who have been directly affected by events. You know, I mean, I'm only ever indirectly affected by these events because I'm counsel in these proceedings, and I think probably anybody who's involved in these kinds of cases, be they counsel, be they judges, be they staff supporting the court, I think all of us, I mean, after this case, I was profoundly affected by what I saw and heard. But then, you know, you meet the victims, the witnesses, and you find people talking about forgiveness, you know, in the face of absolutely appalling crimes. And it gives you hope. It actually gives you some hope. I mean, talking about this court, you know, in Cambodia, you know, people want these proceedings because they want to put these matters to rest. They want society to move forward. They want to find reconciliation amongst each other. And that, you know, however terrible these crimes are, that's actually a very important aspect of justice. And I think the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal, it was really realised quite late. I think at the beginning, the principal purpose was to have criminal prosecutions and find people responsible. It was only later that people started to talk about reconciliation, forgiveness. We have to live together. And I think one of the foundations of this court was that basis. I mean, I think the court here in Cambodia was set up for that very reason because of the damage that had been done to society. So it's that element that actually makes me come back and do this work again and again, because I think there is a hopeful message in all of this, however terrible the crimes are. And they have to be addressed. I mean, let's face it. I mean, if we don't address these crimes, you know, if we don't basically stand up and say, you know, these will be condemned, you know, you will be tried, you will be held responsible, then it will just go on and on and on. It will never stop.
I read on Wikipedia that there is a list with the names of more than 17,000 soldiers who were either ordering or directly participating in this massacre. And I believe the court tribunal on Yugoslav has prosecuted less than 200. What about all these others? The atrocities taking place in Cambodia has a much faster scale, while the number of people being prosecuted is in a handful. What about all these others?
Well, I mean, I think in Srebrenica, you can imagine, I mean, at the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal, we never could have tried 17,000 people. And a number of these individuals, I mean, it's actually very difficult because Serbia hasn't actually prosecuted that many. They have prosecuted a few domestically, so they've taken some of the worst offenders and tried them in their own domestic courts, but it's few and far between. I think the reality of international justice is very, very limited numbers of people who are prosecuted by these kinds of courts, because these kinds of courts don't have the capacity to try, you know, as you rightly point out, the thousands of people who are involved in these events. But I think one of the purposes of international justice is to act as a catalyst for domestic courts to address these issues. And indeed, if you look at the International Criminal Court, it's based on this principle of complementarity, whereby it only intervenes in a state in terms of prosecuting these crimes if that state is unwilling or unable to prosecute the crimes itself. So in other words, if in Libya, for example, the Libyan authorities were to hold criminal proceedings and try people who were accused of these very serious crimes, the court would not intervene. So one of the purposes of the International Criminal Court, which will be the permanent court after all of these other courts have finished their work, will be to act as a catalyst, place pressure on states to address these crimes themselves. And I can give you an example of where it's worked in my own country, the United Kingdom, which is a participant in the International Criminal Court. Quite serious crimes were committed by British soldiers in Iraq. I'm not saying they wouldn't have been tried in our domestic military courts if it hadn't been for the ICC, but I think that ministers within London were well aware that if they didn't properly address these crimes, if people weren't tried for them, then the International Criminal Court was was over there, and that they would get involved, and that they would take these proceedings on. So I do think it'll be working more efficiently and more thoroughly long after I'm dead, but I think we're at the beginning of the time when states will not be able to sort of wriggle out their responsibilities in dealing with these crimes. And indeed, Cambodia, is an example, along with Sierra Leone, of two states that actually did decide to address these crimes themselves without the sort of threat of an external body basically putting them under pressure to prosecute the crimes. They actually decided to do it for themselves. Okay, in both countries with UN assistance, but I think that will actually be the case even with countries responding to the pressures of the ICC. States will need help in properly dealing with these crimes because of the specialist nature of the work and the scale of the crimes that you have to deal with in these kinds of cases.
Thank you very much. I'm really interested. My name is Paulson, and I study international relations. I have two questions to ask you. Question number one, what do you think about ECCC in Cambodia? I mean, their job carried out in Cambodia and Yugoslavia. What is the difference and what is the same point? Second question, some prosecutors left the tribunal case in Cambodia and in the middle of the process. And from your point of view, what do you think? Do you think that hard for them to address this case, or because of the government involved? Thank you.
Can you repeat the second question?
The second question, some prosecutors, yes?
No,
Yeah.
I understand.
Left the ECC, left the case, when I read the newspaper. And we don't know the reason why they left the case in the middle of the process. So I just would like to know, from your point of view, what do you think? Is there something behind this thing, like because of the government pressure, or because of the case is too hard to address, or it's very hard for them to find the evidence or witness for the trial? Thank you.
I understand. In respect, she does deserve a clap, actually, for that question. She does deserve a clap. In respect of the first question, from the outset, I'm going to say on the second question, I have to be extremely, I'm one of the prosecutors at the court. I have to be very careful what I say in particular, because there are judges from the court here. So I've got to be very careful what I say. But in respect of your first question, the distinction actually between the Yugoslav tribunal and the Cambodian tribunal, the most significant one, which is actually probably one of the most positive aspects of the Cambodian tribunal. The Yugoslav tribunal was set up and established by the Security Council, and it was exclusively staffed by international staff members. At the beginning, there were no Yugoslav personnel involved at all, apart from people that were needed to translate documents from the language Serbo-Croat, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, into English or French. There were no Yugoslavs involved in the process at all. Whereas here, at the Cambodian tribunal, the UN mission is essentially providing assistance. I like to think about it as a partnership between national Cambodian staff, lawyers and judges, and the international staff. And that works throughout, so within the prosecution, within the investigating judge's office, amongst the defense and the judges, national and international staff work together. And I think that one of the failures of the Yugoslav tribunal was actually achieving legitimacy, at least in the early days. And I think by actually having an organisation, having a court where you have members of the state where the crimes took place, working alongside internationals, it gives it legitimacy. And I think it enables the population of the country to have greater trust in the organisation because their own people are working within it. And I think if it's just internationals, people are suspicious. don't understand it so well. Equally, of course, and I said it a moment ago, this court is based in the country where the crimes took place. That's also extremely important. The Yugoslav tribunal was based far, far away from where the crimes actually took place. So for many people living in the former Yugoslavia, it was, The Hague in the Netherlands, it was like, the planet Mars. I mean, they hadn't got a clue why the court was based in the Netherlands. Indeed, it was based there actually for quite good reasons, because when it was established, there was still a war going on in Bosnia. It couldn't be based there. But I think that aspect, is extremely important. Also the court applies national Cambodian law. The court is what's called internationalized. It's a special court, but it's actually part of, ultimately, of the Cambodian domestic legal system. A special court within the domestic system with its own appellate court, not the Supreme Court of Cambodia, but its own special appellate court. But again, staffed by international and national judges. So I think, those are probably some distinctions, which reflect positively on the extraordinary chamber. In respect of your second question, I can't speculate on why things as they are. All I can tell you is that in my office, and I've said this to the press, I've said it again here, we are simply following the rules of the court, the law of the court. We are doing everything we are supposed to do under the law to move those two cases forward. I can't comment on what other officers within the court are doing. I'm sorry, I can't help you with that, but that's part of my job, to be very cautious and careful about what I say in public about matters like that. But thank you for the questions. Very, very good questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We have time for one more question, and then perhaps we'll wrap up for this evening.
My name is Teresa. I'm from Indonesia. I'm not a student anymore. I'm too old to be a student. But this one burning question that I've had since I was a little girl, that I'm glad to be able to ask it to you in this event. In the military rank, obeying orders is mandatory. If you were part of the military and you were given the order to destroy a village, for example, would you do it as is expected from you, or would you say no and risk being killed yourself? My question is, legally speaking, how far is a person held responsible, held accountable for the crime that he may have committed reluctantly as part of the military rank? Thank you.
Another excellent question, and actually one that's quite hard to answer. During the Second World War and the legal proceedings that arose, the Nuremberg trials, this issue arose actually. And there was one particular case, the name of which I can't immediately recall off the top of my head, involving what's called a staff officer. So an officer who's not actually out in the field conducting military operations, but is in a headquarters, basically moving orders, so seeing, orders from superior headquarters, inspecting it, countersigning it, and passing it on. And this particular officer was very senior. I think he was a major general, and he was in a major headquarters, staff officer, signing orders, passing them on. And his defence was, at trial, the reason that I sent these orders on is because I was following orders from above. That's the reason that I did it. And actually it was a complete defence for him, in his case. But later, the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal, and it's actually part of the statute of the court, is that superior orders is not a defence. You can't say, I was ordered to do this, that's my complete defence. I was just following orders, that's why I killed these people, that's why I burned this village down. But, superior orders is actually very strong mitigation in terms of punishment. And I can give you an example. You recall in the presentation I showed you that cultural court, Pilica. We knew what had happened there not because we spoke to any survivors, because there were no survivors, but very early on in the work of the tribunal, one of the executioners from that site, very junior chap who was just part of the shooting, the firing squad, basically came to the court and gave himself up and said, look, you know, I've been involved in these terrible crimes, I can tell you exactly what happened at Pilica. I can describe the events, I know how many people were there, you know, I know who else was there, you know, I fired my weapon, you know, I don't know if I killed anybody. And actually what happened to him is that he wasn't able to use that as defense, but because he pleaded guilty, because he accepted responsibility, and because the judges accepted that he'd been ordered to do these things, his sentence was very much reduced. And I think that's right. I actually think superior order should not be a complete defense. You shouldn't be able to say, I'm not guilty because somebody else ordered me to do it. But you're quite right. And I've thought about this. I served in the army myself. How would I deal with this? You know, if you know that if you don't do something, you're going to be killed yourself. I mean, the dilemma there, you know, it's an overwhelming one. So I accept your view, and I've thought about it for years about this issue, because I know in the war in the former Yugoslavia there were many, many good people who got dragged into events and actually, you know, were characterized as monsters. And some of them were monsters, but some of them who I met, because I ended up interviewing many of these people, certainly as the years went by and we got greater access, they were not. They were people, you know, caught up in events and forced to do pretty terrible things that they didn't really want to do, or at least forced to witness terrible things they didn't want to be involved in, and then ended up taking responsibility because they were the senior officer. So, again, I think, you know, we're at a point in the law now which I find quite acceptable. You can't use it as a complete defence, but it is mitigation of punishment. You can say, look, yes, I'm responsible, but I was instructed by somebody else to do this, and therefore I'm guilty, but my punishment should be less.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for what was an incredible presentation, which was both educative and incredibly clear, and also showed us in great detail the tragedy of the Srebrenica genocide, and also for staying to answer so many questions and to highlight in particular the importance of these tribunals and the legacy of courts such as these. If you could all join me in a round of applause. Thank you very much for attending this evening's event, and I hope you'll join us for the next one, which will be similarly publicised in the Cambodia Daily and the Phnom Penh Post.